I am extremely frugal, at least compared to the average American. And the reason I'm so extremely frugal is because I'm trying to reach financial freedom as fast as I possibly can. And being frugal means not only do I save way more money every year, but actually more importantly, it also means that I need millions less dollars to retire than most people I know. And I recently turned 25 years old, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to look back at the last 365 days to see exactly how I spend my money. And after that, I'll show you why I expect to be financially free by the time I'm 28 years old. And to keep track of my spending, I sort my expenses into 7 big categories. So let me go through each of them from least to most important. And my smallest expense isn't really an expense category at all. It's just all of the other miscellaneous stuff that doesn't fit into any other category. Now the expenses in this category can really vary. They can be things that I just need around the house, like phone chargers or toothpaste, or it can be other things that I just don't buy that often. For example, I had to buy some new socks, and I went to see some movies in the movie theater. For a lot of people, clothes and entertainment really should be separate expense categories because they spend so much money on them. But for me, since I spend such little money on these different expenses, I just wrap them all into this miscellaneous category. And last year, I spent $422.18 on these miscellaneous expenses. My second smallest expense might come as a surprise to some people, because for most people, this expense is their second largest. Because the average person, at least in the US, spends over $9,000 per year on transportation. But I spend just a fraction of that. And that's because 3 years into my career, I've still managed to get by without owning a car. And this did require some really careful planning, but I knew that I wanted to be car free when I moved to the area that I live in. And I knew that there were 3 places that I would go all of the time that if I wanted to live car free, I would have to be very close to. And the first was my office. I'm not 100% in office, but I do have to go into the office 2 to 3 times per week. And second was a grocery store. I knew I'd probably only have to go once per week, but hauling groceries is not very fun, so I did want to live as close as possible. And third was a gym. This is my primary hobby, and I go to the gym almost every single day, so I wanted to be super close to a gym. I'll talk more about this later. So by living close to these 3 places, I can walk or I can bike to almost everywhere I go on a regular basis. And I also live right next to a bus stop, so when I do need to go somewhere else that I don't go to very frequently, I can usually get there using public transportation. So my cost of transportation is almost non-existent. The only reason that transportation isn't my lowest expense is because I did take a couple of plane trips last year. And combined, these cost me around $900. But even so, my total annual spending was just $1,017.41. And as a reminder, that is $8,000 less dollars than the average person in the US, and a lot of people spend way more than that. For example, I know someone my age who is paying off a brand new Corvette. My bicycle might not go as fast, but it is helping me get to financial freedom a whole lot faster. And by the way, I have all of this data because I track every single penny that I spend. I think this is one of the most important habits that you can build, and it is always the first thing I recommend to anyone who is trying to save more money. It's extremely hard to fix something if you don't know what's broken, and tracking your expenses is an easy first step to being better with your money. So if you don't already track your expenses, I put a free budgeting template in the description that you can download and use for yourself. But anyway, let's move on to my next expense. My third lowest expense is one of my least favorite, but unfortunately, it's probably lower now than it ever will be in the future. And that's because insurance, especially healthcare, is extremely expensive. Now, I'm pretty healthy, so I don't have the highest cost plan here. I went for a high deductible plan, so it'll cover huge, big expenses, but for most things, I'll have to pay out of pocket. I also have very basic dental and basic vision care, but these don't cost nearly as much. And the reason that this expense is so low right now compared to what it will be in the future is because my company pays 80% of it. And that's why my total health insurance only cost me around $130 per month. I realize that a lot of people spend a lot more than that, at least in America. Now, the good news is that health insurance is the only insurance that I have to pay for. Since I don't own a car, I don't have to pay for car insurance. And I don't own a house, so I don't have any house insurance. So last year, I spent a total of $1,400 $2,564.16 on insurance. Now, a relatively common question I get is what I'll do about health insurance once I retire early. And the truth is that I haven't completely decided, but I'll probably keep paying for a high deductible insurance plan. But without my company paying 80% of it, this is one of the expenses that probably will increase after I quit my job. It's something I'll have to account for when I'm planning my retirement. But this is something I'll probably talk more about as I get closer and finalize my plans. But we need to move on to my fourth largest expense. And this one is really important. And that's because food is one of those expenses that you just can't get rid of. Everybody needs to eat. But I've said before that this is the easiest way to save more money. And I think I'm proof of that. Last year, I spent less than a third as much money on food as the average person in the US. And let me show you exactly how I did that. The first thing I do is find super cheap base ingredients. For a while, eggs were my go-to base ingredient. You can make a ton of things out of eggs, they have pretty good nutritious value, and at the time, they were really cheap. But egg prices have gone kind of crazy since I've started my career, so more recently, I use rice and chicken as my base ingredients. And I will say that pasta and potatoes can also be great options. They're very flexible, you can make a ton of different meals with them, and they're very cheap. And of course, you'll pair these base ingredients with other ingredients. But when the main food that you eat costs less than $1 per pound, then you're going to save a lot of money on food. And the second thing I do is I constantly look for cheaper substitutes. And meat is the best example of this. Meat can range from $20 per pound for a nice steak to $3.50 per pound for chicken breast. But this same principle applies to almost everything. There are so many foods which are pretty similar to others, but one of them will be way cheaper than the other. And third, as you might imagine, I don't eat out very often. And there's a very good reason for that. Even though I only ate at a restaurant 6 times last year, those 6 meals accounted for over 10% of my food budget. Because every single meal at a restaurant costs at least 10 times more than a meal I can prepare at home. So the average person in the US spends $6,800 on food. But I spent just $2,256.34. If you average that over 3 meals a day for the entire year, that means that each one of my meals only cost $2.06. Now, I do sometimes get a free lunch at work or something like that, so I didn't actually eat 3 meals a day 365 times per year. But again, I also ate at restaurants which would offset some of those free lunches. So that price is about right. But moving on to my third largest expense, and this is one that I'm actually kind of embarrassed by. And that's because I spend a lot of money on this. This is the only thing where I spend more money than the average person. And that is my gym membership and related expenses. Now, before I explain how much money I spend on this, I just want to make one thing clear. You do not have to spend as much money as I do on this. In fact, you probably shouldn't. But let me explain why I spend so much money here, and then I'll explain what I recommend for others. The reason I spend so much money here is because I'm still a competitive athlete. I'm not just going to a regular gym and lifting weights or running on a treadmill. I'm a competitive kickboxer, and I fought 6 times last year. And that means that I go to a much more expensive gym because I'm paying for classes instead of just a regular membership. And it also means that I'm spending money on gear, on competition fees, on blood work, on physicals, and all of the other things that come with competing. And that's why this is one of my largest expenses. Last year, I spent $2,802.12 on this. Now, this is a ridiculous amount of money. But let me explain how I think about it. For one, this is my primary hobby, and I spend a lot of time on it. And second, this is not something that will last forever. So the good news is, this expense will probably not be an expense once I retire early. This is really only a hobby that I can take seriously while I'm still in my 20s. So for me, I decided it was worth it. But I'm also very aware that if I really wanted to, I could save thousands more dollars per year and have significantly less risk of brain damage. We all make our own trade-offs, and this is just one that I've made. Here's what I'd recommend for other people. I will say that staying healthy is a lot more important than just saving money. But the good news is, it does not cost a lot to be healthy. Now, a regular gym membership is totally fine if you're actually going to use it. But the truth is, a lot of people don't even need that. Honestly, just doing bodyweight exercises at home is all that a lot of people need. If you live in a place with good weather, then there's a ton of workouts you can do outside. Hill sprints are a personal favorite workout of mine because they take such little time, but you'll get such a great workout in. And honestly, if all you get is a yoga mat and a couple adjustable dumbbells, you really don't need much else. But we've got to move on to my second largest expense. And here we're taking a big step up because we're talking about housing. The cost of living is extremely high where I live. There are studio apartments going for $2,000 a month, and a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment go for a lot more than that. But I absolutely refused to spend that much money. There was no way I'd be able to reach financial freedom before turning 30 years old if I was spending $50,000 per year on rent. So here's what I did instead. The first thing I did was to get off of the big apartment shopping websites. I don't need a big fancy modern apartment building with a pool, a gym, and a cafe. I would much rather have a simpler apartment if it means I can save hundreds of dollars per month. And private owners are typically way cheaper, but you're only going to find them if you use a site like Craigslist. But even so, I was still having trouble finding a place for less than $1,500 a month, which was still more than I wanted to pay. So here's the thing. In college, I was living in a house with 10 other people. I didn't have a private bedroom or private bathroom when I was in college, and that was the norm. So to me, it seemed pretty natural to just keep living like a college student. And this is one of the most powerful ways to save money. I found my current place for just $900 a month. And now I even have my own bedroom and my own bathroom, which is more than I had in college. Now I also have to pay for trash, Wi-Fi, power, and water. So this brought my total annual expenses to $11,983. Now that is still a lot, but it's very cheap for where I live. So between all of the expenses that I've talked about so far, I'm spending $20,045.21 per year. But I haven't even talked about my biggest expense, and that is taxes. Last year, I spent more money on taxes than I did on all of my other expenses combined. My total tax bill was $23,435. But luckily, if I decide to retire early, this expense will basically disappear. But look, I want to explain why I'll be able to retire before turning 28 years old. But first, there is just one other expense that I have left out. And I left it out because the vast majority of people will not have this expense. I'm talking about the expense of running a YouTube channel. Last year, I spent over $1,000 on this channel. And this year, I expect to spend a lot more. And I do earn a few dollars from ad revenue now, but each video makes about $10 to $20. So I'm still losing money, much less making any money, for the hundreds of hours that I spend on this channel. But I never started making these YouTube videos to become a millionaire. I started making these YouTube videos because learning about financial freedom literally changed my life, and I feel like I have to pass that on. So if I help other people reach financial freedom, that is the only reward that I need. But you could massively help me out by smashing the like button or sharing this video with somebody else you care about. But with that said, let me explain why I expect to be financially free at 28 years old. As I said earlier, when you add up all of my expenses, I spend about $20,045 per year. Now, some of these expenses will change in retirement. For example, I already said that health insurance will probably go up, but other expenses might go down, like rent and food, when I no longer live in one of the most expensive areas in the US. And plus, I won't be a competitive kickboxer forever, so that expense will probably disappear. So for that reason, I'll actually assume that my expenses stay the same in retirement. They might actually go down. But the rule of thumb is that you need about 25 times your annual expenses in order to be financially free and safely quit your job. I've explained why in past videos, so make sure to check those out if you're interested in more details. But assuming I spend $20,000 in retirement, then this means that I need about $500,000 to be financially free. That is not a lot of money, although it is a lot of money to save by the time I turn 28. But the good news is, by living so frugally, I'm saving around $80,000 per year. So by the time I turned 25, I had already saved over $250,000. This was from being extremely frugal, but it was also from extremely strong stock market returns. So between saving $80,000 per year and continuing to invest the money that I've already saved, I expect to have over $500,000 at some time when I'm 28 years old. But that said, this does really depend on how the stock market does. Over the long run, I'm very confident that my money will continue to grow, but in the short run, just over the next couple of years, it can be really unpredictable. But even if my investments don't go up at all, I still should hit my financial freedom number just from my savings alone. The only way I won't reach financial freedom by the time I'm 28 is if there's a big stock market crash. But that's sort of out of my control, so we'll just see what happens. And I haven't talked about it much in this video, but the truth is that investing plays a critical role in my path to reaching financial freedom. Not only is investing helping me build wealth now, it's also the only reason that financial freedom is possible. I would never be able to quit my job if I couldn't count on my money continuing to grow. But investing can also be extremely risky, especially for people who want to retire early. And that's why you need to watch this video right here, where I explain how I'm personally investing to retire early, how to get early access to money saved in retirement accounts, and how to massively reduce the risk of running out of money in retirement.